The spotlight cuts through the darkness of Carnegie Hall like a blade. 2,500 people sit in absolute silence, their collective breath held as one. At the center of the stage, under that singular beam of light, sits a man whose weathered hands hover over the keys of a Steinway grand piano. His fingers tremble. Not from fear, not from excitement, but from the weight of 15 years of silence about to be broken. This is Isaiah Walker. And 6 months ago, the world didn't know his name. 6 months ago, he was invisible. 6 months ago, he was sleeping under a bridge in Detroit, another forgotten face in a city full of forgotten dreams. But tonight, he sits on one of the most prestigious stages in the world. Tonight, every major news network has cameras pointed at him. Tonight, 20 million people are watching this moment live-streamed across the globe. The question everyone is asking is simple, yet impossible. How does a homeless veteran go from sleeping on cardboard to performing at Carnegie Hall in 6 months? The answer begins with a single piano key, a forgotten instrument in an abandoned building, and a moment when everything changed. But to understand that moment, we need to go back to where it all began, back to the streets of Detroit where Isaiah Walker had become a ghost in his own life. This is his story, and it starts in the darkest place imaginable, Detroit. A city built on dreams of steel and rhythm. A city where Motown was born, where music once poured from every corner, where possibility felt endless. But Detroit is also a city that knows what it means to fall, to crumble, to be forgotten. On a frigid November morning, as the sun barely breaks through the gray industrial haze, Isaiah Walker wakes up under the Dequindre Cut overpass. The concrete is cold against his back. His breath forms small clouds in the freezing air. Around him, the sounds of the city waking up. Cars rushing overhead. The distant horn of a freighter on the Detroit River. The shuffle of other people experiencing homelessness moving through their morning routines in this space society pretends not to see. Isaiah is 42 years old, but his face tells a story of someone much older. Deep lines carved by weather and hardship frame his dark eyes. His beard is unkempt, streaked with premature gray. His clothes are layered, mismatched items collected from shelters and charity bins. A torn military jacket, the patches faded and barely visible, hangs from his broad shoulders. On his feet, boots held together with duct tape and determination. He moves slowly, methodically, rolling up the thin sleeping bag that provides little protection from the Michigan cold. Every movement is practiced efficient. This is his routine. This has been his routine for longer than he cares to remember. By 7 a.m., Isaiah is on the corner of Gratiot and East Grand Boulevard, holding a worn sign, "Veteran." Anything helps. God bless. The cardboard is water-stained, the letters fading from countless rainstorms. Most people drive past without looking. Some glance, then quickly avert their eyes, uncomfortable with the confrontation of another human being suffering. A few stop, roll down their windows, hand him $1 or $2. He thanks each one, his voice rough from the cold, from the years of not having much to say. By noon, he has collected $11.37. Enough for a meal at the McDonald's 3 blocks away. Enough to make it through another day. But Isaiah Walker is carrying something these passing strangers don't see. Behind those weathered eyes, beneath the layers of survival and adaptation, there exists a secret a truth so profound that even he has buried it deep, hidden it away like a treasure too painful to examine. Isaiah Walker was not always invisible. There was a time when people looked at him and saw something extraordinary. There was a time when his name meant something. There was a time when his hands, those same hands now rough and cracked from exposure, created magic. But that was a lifetime ago. That was before the war, before the breaking, before the long fall into darkness. As the afternoon sun begins its descent, casting long shadows across the Detroit streets, Isaiah makes his way toward the river. He has a spot there, a place where he can wash up before the shelter opens for dinner. The water is freezing, but he's used to it. He scrubs his hands, watches the dirt swirl away, disappearing downstream. And for just a moment, looking at his hands in that cold water, he remembers. He remembers what they used to do, what they used to create. And the memory is so sharp, so vivid, that it physically hurts. He pulls his hands from the water, shoves them into his pockets, and walks away. Some memories are too dangerous to hold. Some truths are too painful to face. To understand Isaiah's fall, you have to understand how far he had to fall from. You have to go back to Detroit, 1989. To a small house on the east side where a 7-year-old boy sat at an upright piano that his mother had bought at a yard sale for $50. The piano was out of tune, several keys stuck. But to young Isaiah, it was everything. From the moment his small fingers touched those keys, something ignited. Something that had been waiting inside him dormant suddenly burst into flame. His mother, Gloria Walker, worked 2 jobs: housekeeper during the day, waitress at night. His father had left when Isaiah was 3, leaving behind nothing but absence and unpaid bills. Gloria was determined her son would have more, would be more. And when she saw the way his face lit up at that broken piano, she knew she had found his path. She couldn't afford lessons, not real ones. But the church had a piano, and the church pianist, an elderly woman named Mrs. Patterson, saw something in young Isaiah. She started teaching him after Sunday service, 30 minutes a week. That was all. But Isaiah was different. What took other children months to learn, he absorbed in days. What seemed impossible for his age, he made look effortless. By age 10, Isaiah was playing at every church function, every community gathering. By 12, he had taught himself Beethoven's Moonlight Sonata by listening to a recording from the library. By 14, he was performing at the Detroit Symphony Orchestra's youth concerts, and music teachers from across the state were calling him a prodigy. The word prodigy was used carefully, reverently. Isaiah Walker wasn't just talented, he was touched. His playing had a quality that professional musicians spent lifetimes trying to achieve. Raw emotion combined with technical perfection. The ability to take a classical composition and make it breathe, make it speak, make it weep. At 16, the letter arrived. Juilliard School of Music. Full scholarship. Room and board included. Gloria cried when she opened it. Her baby boy was going to New York. Her baby boy was going to become everything she had dreamed for him. The next 2 years were a blur of training performances, competitions. Isaiah was among the best students Juilliard had seen in decades. Professors spoke about him in hushed tones. Booking agents started circling. There was talk of a recording contract, a European tour, Carnegie Hall debut at 21. The future wasn't just bright, it was blinding. And then came September 11th, 2001. Isaiah was 19 years old, watching the towers fall on a television in the Juilliard common room. Like millions of young Americans, something shifted in him that day. A sense of duty, a call to serve. His mother begged him not to. His professors tried to convince him this wasn't his path. But Isaiah felt certain. His country needed him. Music would wait. He enlisted in the army. Infantry. Within a year, he was in Iraq. Within 18 months, his world had shattered in ways no amount of piano training could have prepared him for. The details of what happened in Fallujah are locked in classified files and in the chambers of Isaiah's mind where he refuses to let anyone enter. What the official record shows is this specialist Isaiah Walker, Distinguished Service Purple Heart, honorable discharge after severe combat trauma. What the record doesn't show is the man who came home, the young soldier who flinched at car horns, who couldn't sleep without seeing the faces of people he couldn't save, who sat at a piano one afternoon in his mother's house and found that his hands wouldn't work. The connection between his mind and his fingers, once as natural as breathing, had been severed by something doctors called PTSD, but felt like a curse. He tried. God knows he tried. He went back to Juilliard for 1 semester. But sitting in that practice room surrounded by students who still had their dreams intact, Isaiah felt like a ghost. The music was still in his head. He could hear every note. But when he tried to play, his hands shook. His breath became shallow. Panic seized him, and the music died before it could be born. He dropped out, moved back to Detroit. His mother tried to help, but she was sick by then. Cancer. The medical bills piled up faster than her insurance could handle. Isaiah took whatever jobs he could find. Construction, warehouse work, night security. But the PTSD made keeping steady employment nearly impossible. When Gloria died in 2007, Isaiah had nothing left to anchor him. The house went to pay medical debt. He bounced between friends' couches, then shelters, then the streets. Each step down felt inevitable. Each loss felt like confirmation that he was meant to disappear. That the Prodigy had been a lie. That the war had revealed his true self. Broken, useless, forgotten. By 2009, Isaiah Walker had been homeless for 2 years. By 2015, people stopped asking his story. By 2024, he was just another invisible man in a city full of invisible people. The music lived only in his dreams now. And in his dreams, he could still play. The years of homelessness don't pass the way normal time passes. There are no markers, no milestones. One cold night bleeds into another. One hungry day stretches into the next. Time becomes something you endure rather than something you measure. Isaiah developed a routine because routine was survival. Wake before dawn to avoid police sweeps. Find a place to wash up. Hold the sign for a few hours. Eat if he could. Find shelter before dark. Sleep light because the streets are dangerous. Repeat. He learned which shelters had the best food, which corners got the most traffic, which cops would hassle you, and which ones would leave you alone. He learned to make himself small, invisible, unthreatening. He learned to avoid eye contact, because eye contact invited questions, and questions led to conversations about who he used to be, and those conversations were unbearable. Sometimes, late at night in the shelter, he would see someone watching a video on their phone, a classical concert, a piano performance. He would catch glimpses of the stage, the performer's hands on the keys, and something would twist inside his chest. A physical pain that had nothing to do with his body and everything to do with his soul. He trained himself to look away, to not remember, to not feel. The other people experiencing homelessness knew not to ask Isaiah about his past. He didn't talk much, didn't make friends, kept to himself, but they could see something in him. A quality of distance, like he was there but not there. Present in body, but absent in spirit. One veteran at the shelter, a man named Tommy, who'd served in Desert Storm, tried once to connect with Isaiah about their shared experience of service. He'd noticed the faded patches on Isaiah's jacket, asked him what unit he'd been in, where he'd served. But when Tommy mentioned Iraq, mentioned Fallujah, Isaiah's face went completely blank. Not angry, not sad, just blank, like someone had flipped a switch and turned off everything behind his eyes. Tommy never asked again, but he told the other vets to look out for Isaiah. "That's the kind of trauma that doesn't heal," Tommy said. "That's the kind that lives in you forever. The thing about living on the streets is that it accelerates aging. The constant exposure to elements, the poor nutrition, the stress, the lack of medical care. By the time Isaiah was 42, he looked closer to 60. His body ached constantly. His vision had gotten worse, but he couldn't afford glasses. He had a chronic cough that never quite went away. He thought about his mother often, what she would think if she could see him now. The disappointment would kill her all over again. Her prodigy son, the one who was supposed to play Carnegie Hall, reduced to this, reduced to nothing. On the worst nights, Isaiah wondered if it would be easier to just stop, to walk into the Detroit River and let the current take him, to finally rest. But something in him, some stubborn spark, refused to let go completely. Maybe it was cowardice. Maybe it was hope. He didn't know anymore. He just knew he kept waking up each morning, kept going through the motions, kept surviving even when he wasn't sure why. And then came that night in November, 2024. A night that started like any other night, but would end with everything changing. A night when Isaiah Walker would stumble into the one place he'd been avoiding for 15 years. A night when he would touch a piano again. The rain started around 8 p.m., one of those November downpours that turns the Detroit streets into rivers. Isaiah had been on his way to the shelter on 3rd Avenue, but by the time he reached it, the line was already out the door. The shelter only had 70 beds. First come, first served. He was number 83. The shelter worker, a kind woman who knew Isaiah by sight, if not by name, looked at him apologetically. "I'm sorry, baby. We're full up. Try St. Vincent's over on Warren. They might have space." St. Vincent's was 12 blocks away, in the rain, in the dark, with the temperature dropping toward freezing. But there was no choice. Isaiah pulled his jacket tighter and headed back into the storm. By the time he reached Warren Avenue, he was soaked through. The cold had seeped into his bones. His cough was getting worse. And St. Vincent's was also full. The worker there didn't even come to the door, just shook his head through the window. Isaiah stood on the sidewalk, rain streaming down his face, trying to figure out his next move. The bridge overpass would be flooded. The abandoned cars he sometimes slept in would be too cold and wet. He needed to find shelter, real shelter, or this night might be his last. That's when he noticed the building across the street. He'd passed it 100 times, but never really looked at it. 4 stories, red brick, boarded up windows. Once upon a time, it had been something grand. You could see it in the architecture, the ornate cornices, the arched doorways. But now it was just another Detroit casualty, another structure slowly crumbling into memory. There was a section of boarding on the ground floor that had come loose. Isaiah could see it flapping in the wind. An opening, a way in. He looked around. The street was empty. No one in their right mind was out in this weather. He crossed the street, his boots splashing through puddles, and approached the opening. The board had been pried away, probably by other people seeking shelter or kids looking for a place to cause trouble. The gap was narrow, but Isaiah was thin. He could fit. He squeezed through his jacket, catching on nails, and found himself inside. The darkness was total. He used his lighter, the one he'd found on the street 3 months ago, to create a small flame. The space around him slowly came into focus. He was in what had once been a lobby, a grand entryway with a high ceiling and a staircase that curved upward. The floor was covered in debris, broken plaster, scattered papers, graffiti covered the walls. The smell of mold and decay hung heavy in the air. But it was dry, and it was shelter. That was enough. Isaiah moved deeper into the building, his lighter creating dancing shadows on the walls. He found a side room smaller with less debris. This would work. He could sleep here, wait out the storm. In the morning, he'd find somewhere else to go. He was about to settle down when he noticed something. A doorway at the far end of the room. And beyond it, a space that his lighter couldn't quite illuminate. Curiosity, that most basic human impulse, pulled him forward. He stepped through the doorway and found himself in what must have once been an auditorium. Rows of old theater seats, most broken or missing. A stage at the far end elevated with heavy curtains that hung in tatters. And there in the center of that stage, illuminated by the thin beam of moonlight coming through a crack in the boarded windows, was a piano. Isaiah froze. His lighter dropped from his hand, the flame extinguishing as it hit the floor. But he didn't need the light anymore. That moonlight was enough to see. Enough to confirm what his eyes were telling him, but his mind refused to believe. A grand piano. Abandoned. Forgotten. Left behind when this building died. Isaiah's heart began to pound. His breath came fast and shallow, and before he could think about what he was doing, before he could stop himself, his feet were carrying him forward, across the debris-strewn floor, up the steps to the stage, toward the instrument that represented everything he had lost, everything he had run from, everything he had been. Isaiah stood before the piano like a man before an altar, or a man before a grave. He couldn't tell which. The instrument was covered in dust, thick gray, undisturbed. No one had touched this piano in years, maybe a decade. The once polished wood was dull, scratched. Some of the keys had yellowed with age, but it was still beautiful, still dignified. A Steinway Grand, probably from the 1950s. This piano had cost someone a fortune once, and now it sat here abandoned, waiting in the darkness. Isaiah's hands trembled as he raised them. 15 years since he'd touched a piano. 15 years since that day in his mother's house, when his hands had refused to work, when the music had died inside him, when he'd realized that the war had taken more than his peace. It had taken his gift. What if it was still gone? What if he put his hands on these keys and felt nothing? What if the music was dead forever? But what if it wasn't? His fingertips made contact with the keys. Dust transferred to his skin. The keys were cold, slightly sticky. He pressed down gently, testing. The note that emerged was badly out of tune, sharp and discordant. But it was a note. It was sound. It was music, however broken. He pressed another key, another note equally out of tune, then another, testing each one like a doctor examining a patient. Most of them worked. Some stuck. A few in the lower register were completely dead, the strings inside broken or disconnected. Isaiah sat down on the bench. The wood creaked under his weight. He positioned his hands in the proper posture, the way Mrs. Patterson had taught him when he was 7 years old, the way his professors at Juilliard had refined. Curved fingers, relaxed wrists, back straight. Muscle memory is a strange thing. Your body remembers what your mind has forgotten. Your hands know patterns that you haven't consciously thought about in years. Isaiah's fingers found a C major scale running up and down the keyboard. The notes were out of tune, but the pattern was right. The movement was right. And something inside Isaiah cracked open. He began to play. Not a scale, not an exercise, but music. Real music. His hands found Beethoven's Moonlight Sonata, the first piece he'd ever truly mastered as a child. The same piece that had made his mother cry the first time he played it all the way through. His fingers moved across the keys, finding the notes despite the dust, despite the broken tuning, despite 15 years of silence. The sound that filled the abandoned auditorium was haunting. Broken, yes. Imperfect, absolutely. But undeniably beautiful. The out-of-tune notes created an otherworldly quality, like the piano itself was weeping, like it was expressing its own abandonment through Isaiah's playing. Tears began streaming down Isaiah's face. He didn't try to stop them, didn't wipe them away. He just kept playing. His body rocked slightly with the music, his breath synchronized with the phrases. And for the first time in 15 years, Isaiah Walker felt whole. The memories came flooding back. Not the painful ones, not the war, but the good ones. Being 7 years old, discovering this magic for the first time. His mother's face glowing with pride. Mrs. Patterson's gentle encouragement. The first time he performed for an audience and felt their collective energy, their appreciation, their awe. The feeling of being connected to something larger than himself. The feeling of having purpose. The feeling of mattering. He transitioned from Beethoven to Chopin. Nocturne in E-flat major. His hands remembered every note, every dynamic shift, every subtle nuance. Then to Rachmaninoff, Prelude in C-sharp minor. Dark and powerful, the notes cascading like thunderstorms. He played for hours, losing himself completely. The cold, abandoned building disappeared. The rain outside stopped registering. His own pain, his own brokenness faded into the background. There was only the music, only this moment, only this return. When he finally stopped, the silence that followed felt sacred. Isaiah sat with his hands still on the keys, his head bowed, his breathing heavy. His cheeks were wet with tears. His body was exhausted. But something had shifted, something fundamental. He wasn't healed. The trauma wasn't gone. The years of homelessness hadn't magically erased. But for the first time since the war, Isaiah felt something that wasn't pain or numbness. He felt possibility. He felt connection. He felt alive. He looked around the abandoned auditorium. This place, this forgotten building, this broken piano, they were like him, abandoned, discarded, left to decay, but still here, still capable, still holding on to something precious even in the darkness. Isaiah made a decision in that moment. a decision that surprised him. He would come back. This piano, this place, it would be his. Not in any legal sense, but in the way that matters more. This would be his sanctuary, his practice room, his studio, his home. For the first time in years, Isaiah Walker had something to return to, something to look forward to, something that made waking up the next morning feel like a beginning rather than just another day of survival. He carefully closed the keyboard cover, an automatic gesture from his training. He looked at the piano one more time, committing every detail to memory. Then he made his way back through the building, squeezed through the loose board, and stepped back out into the Detroit night. The rain had stopped. The streets glistened under the streetlights, and Isaiah Walker walked toward the overpass with something in his chest that he hadn't felt in 15 years. Hope. Over the next 3 weeks, the abandoned building became Isaiah's secret life, his double existence. By day, he was still the invisible homeless man on the corner, still held the cardboard sign, still collected coins from strangers who looked through him. But by night, when the city grew quiet and the streets emptied, he became someone else. He became a pianist again. Isaiah established a careful routine. He would enter the building after midnight when even the police patrols had thinned out. He brought supplies whenever he could afford them. A flashlight purchased with 2 days' worth of panhandling. Cleaning supplies borrowed from a gas station restroom. Old rags he found in dumpsters. He cleaned the piano with a devotion that bordered on religious. Every key was wiped down, every inch of the wood polished. He couldn't do anything about the tuning that required professional tools he didn't have, but he could restore its dignity. He could show it respect. The building itself revealed its history as Isaiah explored it during daylight hours. This had been the Detroit Conservatory of Music. Opened in 1938. Closed in 1989. 51 years of training musicians, launching careers, creating art. The plaques were still on some walls, though tarnished and barely readable. Photos in broken frames showed students and teachers from decades past. Isaiah found old sheet music in a storage room, water-damaged, yellowed, but still readable. He brought stacks of it to the auditorium, set up his space like a real practice studio. It was insane. He knew it was insane. A homeless man pretending to be a concert pianist in an abandoned building. But it was his insanity, his private world. And for the first time since the war, he had something that was his alone. The piano's condition was worse than he initially thought. Several strings were broken. The action in some keys was sluggish. The tuning was so bad that it hurt to play certain pieces. But Isaiah worked around these limitations. He learned which keys to avoid, which pieces would sound acceptable with the available notes. He became creative, adaptive. His technique came back faster than he expected. The first few nights his hands cramped after 30 minutes. His back ached from the unfamiliar posture. But muscle memory is powerful. Within a week, he could play for 2 hours straight. Within 2 weeks, 4 hours. By the 3rd week, he would play until dawn broke, until he had to rush back to his corner for the morning shift of panhandling. The music itself began to change. Isaiah had always been technically perfect. That was what had made him a prodigy. Flawless execution. But now, with this broken piano in this abandoned space, playing for no one but himself and the ghosts in the walls, something different emerged. Raw emotion. Unfiltered expression. The pain of 15 years poured through his fingers into the keys. He stopped playing other people's compositions exclusively. He began to improvise, to create, to let his own story flow out through sound. Gospel influences from his childhood church, blues phrases he'd heard on Detroit street corners, classical structures from his training, jazz rhythms that lived in the city's DNA. Everything blending together into something uniquely his. The building held the sound beautifully. The acoustics of the old auditorium were designed for music. Even out of tune, even broken, the piano sang in that space. And Isaiah, alone in the darkness, felt less alone than he had in years. Riley Martinez was 26 years old and had been a social worker for 3 years. She worked for Detroit Community Outreach, an organization that provided services to people experiencing homelessness. Her job was equal parts counselor, case manager, and street navigator. She knew most of the regular faces in the downtown area, including Isaiah. She'd tried to engage with him multiple times over the past year, offered resources, asked about his needs. But Isaiah was like so many others who'd been on the streets too long. Polite, but distant. He would accept a sandwich, a bottle of water, maybe a pair of socks. But he never engaged in real conversation, never asked for help beyond the immediate physical need. Riley had noticed something about Isaiah that set him apart. Most people experiencing long-term homelessness had a quality of defeat. But Isaiah had something else. A distance, yes, but also a contained intensity. Like he was holding something locked inside. She'd wondered about his story, but learned early in this work not to push. People shared when they were ready. If they ever were. On a Tuesday evening in early December, Riley was doing a night walk, checking on the people who slept in the area around Warren Avenue. It was part of her routine during the colder months, making sure everyone knew where the warming centers were, distributing blankets and hand warmers, checking for medical emergencies. She was walking past the old conservatory building when she heard it. Music. Piano music. At first she thought she was imagining it, or maybe someone had a radio. But no, this was live. This was real. Someone was playing a piano. At 11 o'clock at night, in an abandoned building. The music was extraordinary. Even from the street, even muffled by walls and boarded windows, she could hear the emotion. The skill. This wasn't amateur playing. This was someone who knew what they were doing. Riley's first thought was kids. Teenagers breaking in, messing around. But kids didn't play like this. This was serious. This was trained. This was professional. She found the loose board that served as an entrance, squeezed through, followed the sound through the dark building using her phone's flashlight to navigate. The music grew louder as she approached the auditorium. She pushed through the door and stopped, frozen by what she saw. On the stage, illuminated by battery-powered lanterns, sat Isaiah, the homeless man from the corner, his eyes closed, his body swaying, his hands moving across the keys with fluid grace, creating music so beautiful, so heartbreaking that Riley felt tears spring to her eyes before she could stop them. She stood there, not wanting to interrupt, barely breathing, watching this transformation. The broken man she'd seen on street corners had vanished. In his place sat an artist, a musician, someone absolutely transcendent. Isaiah played for another 10 minutes before he sensed her presence. His hands stilled on the keys. His eyes opened. And for a moment, they just looked at each other. The social worker and the homeless veteran. The witness and the artist caught in his secret life. "I'm sorry," Riley said softly. "I heard the music. I didn't mean to intrude." Isaiah's face cycled through emotions. Embarrassment, fear, resignation. He started to stand to leave, to run from this exposure. "Please don't stop," Riley said quickly. That was the most beautiful thing I've ever heard. Isaiah remained frozen, half standing, uncertain. How long have you been playing? Riley asked. Used to play? Isaiah said, his voice rough from disuse. Long time ago, used to. You just played like... Riley shook her head, searching for words. You played like a concert pianist. Isaiah sat back down slowly. Was one. Once. The story came out in fragments, halting, painful. The childhood prodigy, Juilliard, the war, the breaking, the long fall. Riley listened without interrupting, without judgment, with only compassion in her eyes. When he finished, silence filled the space between them. Then Riley said, "Can I hear more?" Isaiah hesitated, but something in her face, in her genuine interest, made him decide. He turned back to the piano and began to play again. Riley sat on the floor of the old auditorium, her back against the wall, and listened. Riley came back the next night. And the night after that. She would finish her work shift and make her way to the conservatory building. Isaiah would already be there playing. They developed an unspoken agreement. She wouldn't talk about what she'd discovered. He would let her listen. On the fourth night, Riley brought her phone, set it up on one of the old theater seats, pointed it toward the stage. "What are you doing?" Isaiah asked, his hands stilling on the keys. "Recording," Riley said. "People need to hear this." "No." Isaiah stood up abruptly. "Absolutely not." "Isaiah, you don't understand. I can't have people knowing." "Why not?" The question hung in the air. Isaiah struggled to articulate what he felt. The shame of what he'd become. The fear of being seen. The terror of being known. The certainty that if the world saw him now playing in this abandoned building in his homeless clothes, it would only confirm how far he'd fallen. Because he finally said, "This is all I have left. This place, this piano, this privacy. If you put me out there, they'll take it away. They'll make me leave. Or they'll tear down the building. Or someone will steal the piano. This is mine. The only thing that's mine. Please don't take it from me." Riley understood what he was saying. The possessiveness of someone who had lost everything. The desperate protection of the one small thing that gave life meaning. But she also saw something Isaiah couldn't see. The criminal waste of this gift being hidden. The injustice of this talent being locked away in darkness. "What if I told you that sharing this could change your life?" Riley said gently. "My life is already changed," Isaiah said. "I found this piano. That's enough. But what if it could be more than enough? What if it could be a way back?" "There's no way back from where I am. That's not true. You're proof that's not true. Look at what you're doing. You're creating beauty from nothing. You're making art in the ruins. That matters, Isaiah. That deserves to be seen." They went back and forth for an hour. Riley making her case, Isaiah resisting. But slowly, incrementally, she began to chip away at his fear. She told him about viral videos, about people whose lives had been changed by one moment caught on camera, about the power of story and music combined. "I'm not talking about exploiting you," she said. "I'm talking about showing people what's possible, what survives even in the hardest circumstances. Your music isn't just beautiful, Isaiah. It's testimony. It's evidence of resilience, of the human spirit refusing to die." "I'm scared," Isaiah admitted finally. The first vulnerable thing he'd said to anyone in years. "I know," Riley said. "But what if being scared is exactly why you should do it?" Isaiah looked at the piano, at his hands, at the empty auditorium. He thought about the past 3 weeks, how much this piano had given him, how much he'd found in this forgotten space. Maybe Riley was right. Maybe hiding was just another form of dying. One video, he said, finally. One song. That's all? If nothing comes of it, you drop this. Deal. Riley smiled. Deal. And you can't identify me. Don't use my last name. Don't tell them I'm homeless. Just the music. Just the performance. Can you do that? Riley hesitated. She knew that the full story would be more powerful, but she also knew she had to honor his boundaries. Baby steps. Start small. See what happens. Okay, she agreed. Just the music. Just the performance. They decided on the following Wednesday night. Riley would bring better lighting, would set up multiple angles, would record Isaiah playing a complete piece, and then they would post it online and see what happened. As Riley left that night, Isaiah sat alone with his thoughts. He'd agreed to this. But now in the silence, the fear came rushing back. What was he doing? What was he risking? The safety of obscurity, the comfort of invisibility, the protection of having nothing left to lose. But another part of him, a part he'd thought was dead, whispered different questions. What if this was his chance? What if this moment, this piano, this building, this social worker who refused to look away? What if this was the universe giving him one more shot? He put his hands back on the keys and began to play. The next 5 days were the longest of Isaiah's life. Not because of the waiting, but because of the hope. Hope was dangerous. Hope was painful. Hope meant caring about outcomes again, and caring about outcomes meant the possibility of disappointment. Riley returned on Monday with equipment. A tripod, a better light, an external microphone. She set everything up, testing angles, checking sound quality. The old auditorium, for all its decay, had remarkable acoustics. The recording would sound professional. "What do you want to play?" Riley asked. Isaiah had been thinking about this constantly. What piece would represent everything he wanted to say? What music could contain 15 years of silence, of pain, of survival, of rediscovery? "I want to play something original," he said. Riley looked surprised. "You compose. I've been improvising here these past few weeks, creating something new. I want to play that." "Does it have a name?" Isaiah thought for a moment. "Requiem for the Forgotten." Tuesday night they did a practice run. Riley recorded. Isaiah played through the piece he'd been developing. 23 minutes of music that moved from darkness to light, from despair to hope, from brokenness to wholeness. It incorporated everything he'd learned, everything he'd lived, everything he'd survived. Gospel, blues, classical, jazz, all woven together into something that was uniquely his. When he finished, Riley was openly crying. "Isaiah, that's incredible. That's legitimately incredible. It's not perfect. The piano is out of tune. I make mistakes." "Stop," Riley interrupted. "It doesn't need to be perfect. It's authentic. That's worth more than perfect." Wednesday arrived. Isaiah couldn't eat. His hands shook. The PTSD symptoms he'd been managing so well for weeks came roaring back. What was he doing? Why had he agreed to this? He could still back out. Tell Riley he'd changed his mind. Disappear back into the safety of obscurity. But he didn't. He showed up at the conservatory at the agreed time. Riley was already there, equipment set up waiting. "You ready?" she asked. "No," Isaiah said honestly. "But let's do it anyway." Riley positioned the camera, adjusted the lighting. The stage was simple. Just Isaiah, the piano, and the decay of the forgotten building surrounding them. No attempt to hide where they were, The peeling paint, the broken seats, the graffiti-covered walls, all visible in the frame. The context mattered. The setting told its own story. "Whenever you're ready," Riley said softly. Isaiah sat at the piano, placed his hands on the keys, closed his eyes, took a breath, and began to play. Requiem for the Forgotten started in silence, literally. Isaiah sat motionless for 15 seconds, his hands hovering above the keys before striking the first note. A single low, sustained note that resonated through the empty auditorium. Then another, building slowly, carefully, like someone learning to walk again after a long injury. The opening movement was sparse, minimal. Each note given space to breathe, to exist, to matter. The out-of-tune quality of the piano added to the effect, creating harmonics that were both beautiful and unsettling. This was music from the margins, music from the forgotten places. As the piece developed, the tempo increased. More notes, more complexity. Isaiah's hands moved with increasing confidence across the keyboard. The second movement introduced gospel influences, call and response patterns, the feeling of a church service, the community of voices raised together. Even though there was only one instrument, you could hear the choir, the congregation, the faith. The third movement shifted to blues, raw emotional speaking to pain without apology. Notes bent and twisted like the lives of people who've survived the unsurvivable. The piano seemed to weep, to wail, to testify. Isaiah's body moved with the music now, rocking, swaying. His face, usually so guarded, completely open, every emotion visible. Tears streaming down his cheeks as he played. The fourth movement was classical in structure, but modern in execution. Complex runs, precise technique. The training, the years at Juilliard, evident in every phrase, but filtered through everything that had come after. The perfection was there, but now it was tempered with humanity, with imperfection, with life. The final movement brought everything together. All the themes from earlier now intertwined, conversing with each other. Gospel calling to blues, classical answering jazz. The music built to a powerful climax. Isaiah's hands flying across the keys, his whole body engaged in the act of creation. And then, as suddenly as it had built up, the music became quiet again, gentle, resolving, coming home. The final notes were simple, pure, a return to the beginning, but transformed, changed by the journey. Isaiah played the last note. Let it resonate, let it fade naturally into silence. His hands remained on the keys for a moment before slowly lifting away. He sat still, his head bowed, his breathing heavy. Riley let the camera roll for another 30 seconds, capturing the silence after the music, the space where sound had been, the holiness of the moment. Then she stopped recording. Neither of them spoke for several minutes. What was there to say? The music had said everything. The performance had been transcendent. They both knew it. Finally, Riley said quietly, "That's going to change everything." Isaiah looked at her, exhausted, vulnerable, terrified. "Promise me something. What if this goes wrong? If people mock it or ignore it, or if it makes things worse somehow? Promise you'll help me disappear again. Promise I can come back here and just play for myself and no one else." Riley understood what he was really asking. Promise that if he took this risk and it broke him, She wouldn't abandon him. Promise that he could trust her. "I promise," she said. "But Isaiah, this isn't going to go wrong. I promise you that too." Riley posted the video on Thursday morning. She'd edited it carefully, keeping the integrity of the full performance while adding simple text overlays. A pianist in an abandoned building, music from the margins. This is his requiem for the forgotten. She didn't use Isaiah's full name, just Isaiah. Didn't mention his homelessness directly. Let the setting speak for itself. Posted it to YouTube, shared it on Twitter, Instagram, TikTok. Tagged it with music-related hashtags, Detroit-related hashtags, inspiration-related hashtags. Then she waited. For the first few hours, nothing happened. A few dozen views, some likes from her friends and colleagues, but no traction, no virality. Riley checked obsessively throughout the day, refreshing her phone every few minutes. By noon, the video had 300 views. By evening, 800. Isaiah, meanwhile, was having a different kind of day. He'd gone to his usual corner, held his usual sign. But his mind was elsewhere. He kept thinking about the video out there in the world, his music, his face, his story, even if partially told. The vulnerability of it was terrifying. What if people laughed? What if they criticized? What if someone recognized him from his Juilliard days and shared the before and after as a cautionary tale? What if this became just another instance of people gawking at the downtrodden for entertainment? By nightfall, Riley texted him 200 views. Good comments. Don't worry. Isaiah tried not to worry. Went to the conservatory, played for himself, let the music calm his racing thoughts, went to sleep under the overpass with his phone off, not wanting to know. But something was happening. Something Riley was watching in real time. Around midnight, a music professor in Boston stumbled on the video, shared it with her network. "This is extraordinary. Who is this pianist?" Around 2 a.m., a viral content account with 3 million followers reposted it. This gave me chills. Watch until the end. By Friday morning, when Isaiah woke up and finally turned on his phone, he had 47 text messages from Riley. All caps, exclamation points. He couldn't quite process what they were saying. Something about numbers, something about shares, something about news stations. He called her. She answered on the first ring, her voice high with excitement. "Isaiah, we're at 15 million views. 15 million. In less than 24 hours. The number didn't compute. That's not possible. It's happening. Every major news outlet is picking it up. They're calling you the mystery pianist, the abandoned building performer. People are crying in the comments. They're sharing their own stories of struggle and survival. You've touched something, Isaiah. Something huge." Isaiah sat on the cold, concrete phone pressed to his ear, trying to understand. 15 million people. 15 million people had heard his music, had seen him at the piano, had witnessed his private sanctuary. "What do we do now?" he asked. Riley laughed, a sound of pure joy. Now everything changes. By Saturday, the video had hit 50 million views. It was trending worldwide on every social platform. Major news networks were running segments about the mystery pianist in Detroit. Entertainment sites were trying to dig up information about Isaiah's identity and background. Music critics were analyzing the performance, calling it raw genius and profoundly moving. The comments section had become its own phenomenon. Thousands upon thousands of people sharing how the music had affected them. "I'm a veteran with PTSD. This made me sob. Thank you for creating beauty from pain. I've been homeless. I know what it's like to feel invisible. This performance gave me hope. I'm a classical pianist with 3 degrees, and I can't play with this much emotion. This is what music is supposed to be. Detroit native here. Proud to see our city's resilience represented in art. I've watched this 12 times. Every time I discover something new. This is a masterpiece. Riley's phone was exploding with interview requests. Local Detroit news wanted to talk to both of them. National morning shows were calling. NPR wanted to do a feature. Record labels were leaving messages. Concert promoters. Booking agents. Everyone wanted a piece of this story. Isaiah, meanwhile, was having a full-scale panic attack. He'd retreated to a quiet spot by the river, away from everyone trying to breathe. The attention was everything he'd feared. The visibility felt like exposure, like being stripped naked in public. He wanted to run, to disappear, to undo the past 48 hours. Riley found him there, sat down beside him without speaking. Let him work through it. "This is too much," Isaiah said finally. "This is too fast, too big. I can't handle this. I know it feels overwhelming." "You don't know." Isaiah's voice was sharp. "You don't know what it's like to be invisible for 15 years and then suddenly have millions of people looking at you. You don't know what it's like when the person they're looking at isn't even real anymore. That pianist in the video, that's not me. That's who I used to be. That's someone I can't be again. Why not? Because I'm broken, Riley. Because I sleep under a bridge. Because I have PTSD that makes me lose whole hours sometimes. Because I can't even remember the last time I felt like a real human being. You've created an illusion. A beautiful story about the homeless man who plays piano. But I'm not a story. I'm a person. And that person is still homeless. Still broken. Still scared." Riley let him finish. Then she said quietly, "You're right. You are broken. And you are homeless. And you are scared. But you're also the person who created that music, who played with such beauty that 50 million people stopped what they were doing to listen. Both things are true, Isaiah. You don't have to choose one or the other." Isaiah shook his head. "You don't understand what you've done. This attention, it has a shelf life. In 2 weeks, people will move on to the next viral moment, and I'll still be here, still on that corner. But now, with the added humiliation of everyone knowing I was almost something once. Or Riley said in 2 weeks you could be somewhere completely different. This is an opportunity, Isaiah, a real one, but only if you're willing to take it. I don't know how. That's okay. I do. Will you trust me? Will you let me help you navigate this?" Isaiah looked at her. This young woman who'd heard music in an abandoned building and decided to care. Who'd come back night after night. Who'd convinced him to be seen. She'd kept her promise not to exploit him. Had presented the music with respect and dignity. Maybe she could be trusted with this too. "What would I have to do?" he asked. "For now, just don't run. Don't disappear. Stay visible. Let people see you. Let them hear your story in your own words when you're ready. The rest we'll figure out together." Isaiah thought about the alternative. Going back to pure invisibility. Living under the bridge. Holding the sign. But now with the ghost of what could have been haunting him forever. At least if he tried, if he took this risk, he'd know. He'd know if redemption was possible. If second chances were real. If the music could save him not just emotionally, but practically. "Okay," he said. "Okay, I'll try." Riley smiled. "That's all I'm asking." The first interview was with a local Detroit news station. Riley had screened the journalist, carefully chosen someone known for sensitive reporting. They met at the conservatory building on the stage with the piano. Isaiah insisted on that. This was his space. His terms. The journalist, a woman named Sandra Cooper, was professional and kind. She asked about Isaiah's background, his training, the war, the homelessness. Isaiah answered honestly but carefully, not revealing everything, keeping some parts of his story private, but giving enough for people to understand the journey. When Sandra asked him to play, Isaiah performed a shortened version of Requiem for the Forgotten. The camera crew captured it all. Isaiah could see tears in Sandra's eyes as he played. The segment aired Sunday evening. Within an hour, it had been shared across every social media platform. Now people had the full story. The Prodigy, Juilliard, the war, PTSD, the long fall, the abandoned piano, the rediscovery. Detroit veteran who was once piano prodigy finds his voice again in abandoned building. The headline was everywhere. And suddenly Isaiah was the face of something larger than himself. He became a symbol for veterans struggling with PTSD, for people experiencing homelessness, for second chances, for the power of art to heal. The attention was intense. Interview requests multiplied. People started showing up at the conservatory building wanting to see the space hear Isaiah play, take selfies. The city of Detroit, which had been planning to demolish the building, suddenly announced plans to preserve it, to turn it into a community music center. The piano that had been forgotten for a decade was now being called a historic instrument. Isaiah was overwhelmed, but Riley helped him manage it all. She became his unofficial manager, screening requests, setting boundaries, making sure he wasn't exploited. She also connected him with Veteran Services mental health resources, housing assistance. The practical help he'd needed for years, but had been too proud or too broken to seek. Within a week, Isaiah had temporary housing, a small efficiency apartment provided by a veterans organization. It was the first time he'd slept in a real bed in over a decade. The first time he'd had a door that locked from the inside. The first time he'd had privacy and safety and warmth. But the attention kept growing, and with it came the offers. Carnegie Hall sent a formal invitation. Would Isaiah be willing to perform there in 6 months, a full concert, his choice of program? All proceeds going to veteran homelessness initiatives. Record labels wanted to produce an album. Publishers wanted him to write a book. Hollywood producers wanted to option his life story. It was too much, too fast, too surreal. Isaiah felt like he was dreaming, or maybe having a breakdown. He couldn't tell which. The boundaries between his past and present, between the person he'd been and the person he was becoming, felt blurred and unstable. One night, he went back to the overpass where he'd slept for years. Stood there looking at the spot where his sleeping bag had been, trying to reconcile that Isaiah with the Isaiah who now had interview requests from Good Morning America. How do you make sense of such a dramatic transformation? How do you integrate these vastly different versions of yourself? How do you trust that this new reality is real and not just another thing that will be ripped away? Isaiah didn't have answers. He just knew he had to keep moving forward, keep choosing to be visible, keep playing the piano, keep trusting that the music that had saved him once could continue to save him again. As December turned to January, Isaiah began to understand the complicated burden of becoming a public figure. People projected their own hopes, their own stories, their own needs onto him. He wasn't just Isaiah anymore. He was the homeless pianist, the veteran who overcame, the symbol of hope. At the grocery store, people recognized him, asked for selfies, told him their own stories of struggle. My brother is homeless and an addict. Can you talk to him? My son has PTSD. Can you give him advice? "You've inspired me so much, will you come speak at my church?" Isaiah wanted to help, but he was barely holding himself together. His own PTSD wasn't cured. It was just temporarily overshadowed by the chaos of his new circumstances. He still had nightmares, still had panic attacks, still had moments where the present disappeared and he was back in Fallujah, back in the darkness. Riley became his anchor. She understood that visibility was a double-edged sword, that Isaiah needed protection as much as he needed opportunity. She started saying no to things, limiting his public appearances, insisting on boundaries. But the pressure kept building. Everyone had an opinion about what Isaiah should do next. Veteran groups wanted him to be an activist. Music organizations wanted him to be a performer. Homeless advocates wanted him to be a spokesperson. Everyone wanted a piece of him. Everyone had plans for his redemption. The Carnegie Hall offer weighed on him most heavily. It was the opportunity of a lifetime. The very stage he'd been training for when he was at Juilliard before everything fell apart. But the thought of actually doing it, of stepping onto that stage, filled him with terror. "I can't play Carnegie Hall," he told Riley one afternoon. They were in his small apartment, the first real home he'd had in years. "I'm not ready. I'll never be ready." "Why not?" "Because what if I fail? What if I get up there and freeze? What if the PTSD kicks in and I have a panic attack in front of thousands of people? Everyone thinks I'm this inspirational figure. What if they see the truth, that I'm still broken, that the music didn't actually fix me?" Riley considered her response carefully. "Isaiah, no one thinks you're fixed. People responded to your music because it was honest, because it came from a place of real pain and real survival. If you go to Carnegie Hall and play perfectly technically flawless, I think people will be disappointed. They don't want perfection. They want authenticity." That's a nice sentiment, but this is Carnegie Hall, one of the most prestigious venues in the world. They don't sell tickets to authenticity. They sell tickets to excellence. Then give them both. Give them the excellence of your training and the authenticity of your experience. But Isaiah, you have to decide. Do you want to spend the rest of your life wondering what could have been? Or do you want to take the risk? Isaiah was quiet for a long time. He thought about the piano in the abandoned building, about the first night he'd played after 15 years of silence, about the terror he'd felt and the joy that had followed. He'd taken a risk then. Let Riley record him. Let the video go public. And yes, it was overwhelming and scary and complicated. But it had also been worth it. 6 months, he said finally. Carnegie Hall is in June. That gives me 6 months to prepare. 6 months to get ready. Can we make that work? Riley smiled. We can make that work. The decision made, Isaiah felt something shift. Purpose. Direction. Fear, yes, but also excitement. He was going to play Carnegie Hall, not as the prodigy he'd been at 20, but as the man he was now. Broken and healing, fallen and rising, lost and found. The preparation began in earnest. Isaiah needed a piano, a real one, properly tuned, in a space where he could practice for hours every day. The Detroit Symphony Orchestra offered their practice rooms. A local piano company donated a Steinway grand for his personal use. Isaiah was paired with a therapist who specialized in PTSD and performance anxiety. Sessions twice a week. Learning to manage the triggers. Learning to stay present. Learning to separate the war from the music, from the pressure of public expectation. He also started teaching. Riley connected him with an after-school program for at-risk youth. Isaiah would spend 2 afternoons a week teaching basic piano to kids from the neighborhoods he'd once been invisible in. These kids understood struggle, understood adversity. Isaiah found he could connect with them in ways he couldn't connect with the media or the music industry professionals who suddenly wanted meetings. The kids didn't care that he'd been homeless. They thought it made him cool, real. One 12-year-old named Marcus told him, "My teacher says you're proof that it's never too late, that even if everything goes wrong, you can still come back." Isaiah looked at this kid, all hopeful eyes and untapped potential, and realized the weight of what he represented. Not just to Marcus, but to thousands of kids like him. Kids who were told they couldn't make it, that their circumstances defined their destiny, that people like them didn't get second chances. "You know what I learned," Isaiah told Marcus. "I learned that you don't come back to who you were. You become someone new, someone who knows both sides, the falling and the rising. That makes you stronger, makes your music matter more." Marcus nodded like he understood. Maybe he did. By February, Isaiah had multiple paths forward, each one tempting, each one complicated. Offer one record deal. A major label wanted to produce an album. Original compositions. His story told through music. Studio time, professional arrangements. National distribution. Advance payment of $500,000. Offer 2-book deal. A publisher wanted his memoir. 6-figure advance. Professional ghostwriter to help. National book tour. From Juilliard to the streets and back, a memoir of music, war, and redemption. Offer 3 speaking circuit. Multiple organizations wanted him as a keynote speaker. Veteran conferences, homeless advocacy events, music education symposiums, $20,000 per appearance. Offer 4 teaching position. The Detroit Conservatory, newly reopened thanks to public interest in Isaiah's story, offered him a faculty position. Teaching underprivileged students, full benefits, stable income, home. Each offer represented security, financial stability, a way forward. But each also came with strings, expectations, the requirement to be on all the time, to be the inspiring figure, the overcomer, the symbol. Isaiah met with Riley to discuss the options. They spread the contracts across his small kitchen table. Numbers and clauses and opportunities that would have seemed impossible 3 months ago. "What do you want?" Riley asked. "Not what you think you should do, not what will make the best story. What do you want?" Isaiah thought about it. Really thought. "I want to play Carnegie Hall. I want to do it right. Everything else feels like a distraction from that." Okay, so we focus on Carnegie Hall. What else I want to teach? Those kids at the after-school program, they matter to me, more than the book deals or the speaking fees. I want to do work that matters, not just work that pays. What about financial security? You've been homeless, Isaiah. You know what it's like to have nothing. These offers could ensure you never go back to that. I know. And part of me wants to grab everything just in case it all disappears. But I also know that money doesn't fix what's broken in me. Music does. Teaching does. Purpose does. They made a plan. Isaiah would accept the teaching position at the conservatory. Stable income, meaningful work flexibility to prepare for Carnegie Hall. He would decline the book deal for now, maybe revisit it later. He would do select speaking appearances, but only for veteran and homeless organizations, not for corporate events looking for inspiration porn. And he would think about the record deal after Carnegie Hall. Let the performance determine whether people actually wanted to hear more of his music. It was a conservative approach. probably left money on the table. But it felt authentic, felt sustainable, felt like something Isaiah could maintain without losing himself. As they finished up, Riley said, "You know what I'm proud of? What 3 months ago you were invisible. People looked right through you. Now you have all these options, and you're choosing based on your values instead of your fears. That's growth." Isaiah smiled. A real smile? The kind he'd forgotten how to make during the long years on the streets. "I'm still terrified about Carnegie Hall." Good. Fear means it matters. March brought a crisis. Isaiah was practicing at the conservatory preparing for Carnegie Hall when it happened. He was in the middle of a complex Rachmaninoff piece, hands flying across the keys, when suddenly his mind went blank. Completely blank. He couldn't remember the next phrase, couldn't find his place. His hands froze. Panic surged through him. This was his nightmare, the thing he'd feared since agreeing to Carnegie Hall. What if he couldn't do it? What if the pressure broke him? What if he got on that stage in June and froze just like he was freezing now? He tried to restart, placed his hands on the keys, but the panic had taken hold. His breath came short and fast. His vision narrowed. The practice room felt too small, too close. The walls were closing in. Isaiah stumbled away from the piano, out of the room, down the hallway, out of the building. He kept walking. No destination. Just walking. Trying to breathe, trying to calm down. But the panic attack had its grip. He ended up at the overpass, his old spot, where he'd slept for years. Standing there looking at the space beneath the bridge, he felt the pull, the temptation to go back, to give up, to return to invisibility where there were no expectations, no pressures, no possibility of public failure. It would be so easy. Just walk away from Carnegie Hall, from the teaching position, from all of it. Disappear back into the margins. The world would move on. Find another story, another symbol. Leave him in peace. His phone rang. Riley. He didn't answer. She called again, and again. Finally, he picked up. "Where are you?" Her voice was tight with concern. "The overpass." Silence. "Then I'm coming to you. Don't move." She arrived 20 minutes later, found him sitting on the curb near his old sleeping spot, sat down beside him without speaking. Let him work through whatever he was working through. Finally, Isaiah said, "I can't do it. Carnegie Hall, any of it. I thought I could. I thought I was ready. But I'm not. I'm still the broken guy under the bridge, the music in the abandoned building that was luck, or temporary insanity, but sustained performance. Teaching, being a functional member of society. I don't know how to do that anymore." What happened today, Isaiah told her about freezing, about the blank mind, about the panic. What if that happens at Carnegie Hall? What if I humiliate myself in front of thousands of people? Then you'll be human, fallible, real, the things people actually relate to. Riley. "I appreciate your optimism, but this is serious. I can't stop." She interrupted. "Stop telling me what you can't do. You've spent 15 years believing you can't. And you know what? You survived anyway. You made it through impossible circumstances. You found that piano. You created that music. You've rebuilt yourself from nothing. Don't tell me you can't. That's different. That was private. No one was watching." 50 million people watched the video, Isaiah. 50 million. And you know what they saw? Not perfection. They saw authenticity. Pain transformed into beauty. That's what you do. That's your gift. Not flawless technique, Not Carnegie Hall-ready polish, but the ability to take what's broken and make it sing. Isaiah shook his head. You're asking me to be vulnerable in front of the world, to risk everything. No. I'm asking you to do exactly what you did in that abandoned building. Be yourself. Play your truth. The only difference is the stage. But the music, the heart, that's the same. They sat in silence for a while. Cars passed overhead. The city hummed around them. This spot that had been Isaiah's home for so long. His refuge and his prison. What if I fail? Isaiah asked quietly. Then you fail. And then you get up and try again. That's what survivors do. That's what you've been doing your entire life. Isaiah thought about the piano in the abandoned building. About the first night he'd played after 15 years. About how scared he'd been. But also about how necessary it had been. How playing that night had saved his life in ways that had nothing to do with viral videos or opportunities. Maybe Carnegie Hall was the same. Not about success or failure, but about showing up. About being willing to be seen. About taking the risk of being fully alive. Okay, he said finally. Okay, I'll do it. But I need help. Real help. Not just cheerleading. I need to figure out how to manage this. How to keep the panic from taking over. We'll figure it out, Riley said. Together. They sat there a while longer. Then Isaiah stood up, looked at the spot under the bridge one last time, and walked away. Not running from it, not ashamed of it, but leaving it behind, moving forward. The final 3 months before Carnegie Hall were the hardest work of Isaiah's life. Harder than Juilliard, harder than the war, harder than surviving on the streets, because this work required him to confront himself, to face the trauma he'd been avoiding, to integrate the broken parts instead of hiding them. His therapist, Dr. Sarah Kim, was instrumental. She didn't try to fix him. Instead, she helped him understand that the PTSD, the homelessness, the years of invisibility, they were part of his story. Not shameful secrets to overcome, but experiences that had shaped his music, his perspective, his humanity. You play like someone who's survived, Dr. Kim told him. That's not despite your trauma. That's because of it. Carnegie Hall doesn't need another technically perfect performance. They need yours. Isaiah worked on grounding techniques for when panic struck. Breathing exercises. Visualization. Ways to stay present when his mind wanted to flee to the past or the future. He practiced performing under stress. Dr. Kim would trigger him on purpose during practice sessions, then help him work through it while continuing to play. It was brutal. There were days Isaiah wanted to quit. Days he screamed in frustration. Days he cried from the sheer difficulty of staying present with his pain while creating beauty from it. But slowly, incrementally, he got stronger. His playing evolved too. Isaiah stopped trying to recreate who he'd been at Juilliard. That pianist was gone. Dead in Fallujah. In his place was someone else. Someone whose music contained both darkness and light. Someone whose technique was still exceptional, but now in service of something deeper than perfection. He chose his Carnegie Hall program carefully. Opening with Beethoven's Moonlight Sonata, the piece that had started it all when he was a child. Then Chopin's Nocturne in E-flat major, played with the weight of everything he'd lost. Rachmaninoff's Prelude in C-sharp minor for its power and drama. And closing with his own composition, Requiem for the Forgotten, expanded and refined, but maintaining its raw emotional core. 2 hours of music. Everything he'd been. everything he'd survived, everything he'd become. The news about Carnegie Hall spread. The concert sold out in 48 hours. They added a second night. That sold out too. People were traveling from across the country to hear him play. Veteran organizations were bringing busloads of people. Homeless shelters in New York were provided free tickets by donors who wanted the people Isaiah represented to be present. The pressure was enormous. But Isaiah had learned something during these months of preparation. The pressure would always be there. The fear would always exist. PTSD didn't disappear because you wanted it to. Trauma didn't heal on a convenient timeline. The question wasn't whether he could make the fear go away. The question was whether he could play anyway, could create anyway, could be fully alive anyway. The answer he was discovering was yes, on his good days and his bad days, when the memories were bearable and when they weren't. In the practice room and on stage, in private and in public, he could show up, he could play, he could exist. That was his victory. Not the Carnegie Hall booking, not the viral video, not the media attention, but the simple fact of still being here, still creating, still becoming. 2 weeks before the concert, Isaiah visited the abandoned conservatory building one last time. The city had started renovation work. The space would soon be the Detroit Community Music Center, a place where kids like he'd been could discover their gifts. But for now, it was still mostly as he'd found it: debris and decay and ghosts. The piano was gone, moved to the new facility. But Isaiah stood on the stage where it had been, where he'd played that first night, where Riley had recorded the video that changed everything. He felt the weight of everything that had happened in this space. "Thank you," he said to the empty room, to the building, to the piano that was no longer there, to the version of himself that had stumbled in here desperate and broken. "Thank you for saving my life." Then he left, ready to face whatever came next. June 15th, 2024. Carnegie Hall, New York City. The day Isaiah had been working toward for 6 months. The day he'd been running from for 15 years. The day that would prove whether redemption was real or just a story people told themselves. Isaiah arrived at the venue 3 hours before the performance. Riley was with him. So was Dr. Kim. They'd planned for this, built in support, anticipated that he might need help managing his anxiety. Backstage at Carnegie Hall was surprisingly ordinary, just hallways and dressing rooms and stage crew doing their jobs. But when Isaiah walked onto the stage for sound check, looked out at the empty 2,500 seats, felt the weight of history in that space, his breath caught. Every legendary musician had played this stage. Horowitz, Rubinstein, Bernstein, Yo-Yo Ma Lang Lang. Now Isaiah Walker, homeless veteran, former Prodigy, broken and healing. About to attempt the impossible. "How do you feel?" Riley asked. "Terrified," Isaiah said honestly, "but also ready. Does that make sense?" Perfect sense. The audience began arriving at 6:30. Isaiah watched on a backstage monitor, the theater filling with people. Many were veterans, their service visible in their bearing, their jackets, their recognition of each other. Others were homeless or formerly homeless, dressed in their best clothes, grateful for the opportunity to be here. Music lovers, supporters, press, cameras. The event was being live-streamed to millions watching at home. At 7:15, Isaiah had his first panic attack of the evening. Sudden and overwhelming, Dr. Kim walked him through it. Grounding techniques, present moment awareness. It passed after 10 minutes. He was shaking, but functional. "This is normal," Dr. Kim reminded him. "Your nervous system is responding to a perceived threat, but you're safe, you're prepared, you can do this." At 7:45, 15 minutes before showtime, Isaiah stood in the wings. He could hear the audience settling, the energy building, the anticipation. On stage, the Steinway Grand waited, his piano for the night. Properly tuned. Perfect condition. Nothing like the broken instrument in the abandoned building. Riley stood beside him. "Last chance to run," she joked. Sort of. "Too late for that," Isaiah said. "I'm already here. You are. And you're going to be amazing. Or I'm going to freeze and humiliate myself. Or that. But even if you do, you'll survive. You've survived worse." At 8 o'clock, the house lights dimmed. The audience quieted. The stage manager gave Isaiah the cue. He took a breath, stepped out of the wings, walked onto the Carnegie Hall stage. The applause was immediate and thunderous, a standing ovation before he'd played a single note. Isaiah stood there overwhelmed as 2,500 people on their feet expressed their support, their belief, their willingness to witness whatever was about to happen. He walked to the piano, sat on the bench, looked out at the audience, at the cameras, at the lights, at Riley in the front row giving him a thumbs up, at the veterans in their section, at the faces of people who'd traveled to be here. And then he stopped looking at them, closed his eyes, placed his hands on the keys, and remembered the abandoned building, the first night, the broken piano, the darkness, the discovery, the music that had saved him. This was just another piano, just another performance, just another moment of choosing to be visible instead of invisible, whole instead of broken, present instead of absent. Isaiah took a breath and began to play. The first notes of Moonlight Sonata emerged from the piano like whispers, delicate, haunting. The famous opening theme that every pianist knows, but played now with a weight that transformed it. This wasn't a student's recital piece. This was a requiem, a remembrance, a return. Isaiah's hands moved across the keys with the muscle memory of decades, but his face, his body, his entire being was present in a way that transcended technique. He wasn't performing the piece, he was living it. Each note carried meaning. Each phrase told a story. The first movement unfolded slowly. Isaiah took his time, gave each note space to breathe. The audience sat in absolute silence. No coughs, no shuffling, complete attention. They understood they were witnessing something rare. As the second movement began, more energetic, more urgent, Isaiah's playing intensified. His body rocked with the music, his breathing synchronized with the phrases. The control was still there, the precision, but now married to raw emotion. Technical perfection in service of truth. The third movement was storm and fury. Isaiah's hands flew across the keyboard. The power of youth combined with the wisdom of suffering. This was Beethoven played by someone who understood darkness, who had lived in darkness, who had found light again. When the final notes faded, there was a moment of silence, then applause. But Isaiah didn't acknowledge it, didn't take a bow. He moved immediately into the next piece. Chopin's Nocturne in E-flat major. This was the most dangerous piece for Isaiah, the most vulnerable. the one that had made his mother cry when he was young, the one that represented everything beautiful he'd lost. As he played it, now tears streamed down his face, unashamed, visible to everyone. The melody was heartbreaking, lyrical and sweet, but tinged with melancholy. Isaiah played it like a love song, like a goodbye, like a hello. The middle section built to passion, then resolved back to tenderness. The final phrases were almost whispered. A prayer, a benediction. The audience was crying too. Not everyone, but many. You could hear sniffles, see tissues being pulled from bags. The emotion was contagious, shared, collective. Without pause, Isaiah moved into Rachmaninoff. The prelude in C-sharp minor. This piece was all power, all drama. The famous opening chords struck like lightning. Boom, 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 the kind of sound that makes your heart race, makes you sit up straighter. Isaiah attacked the piano with controlled fury. This was the war. This was PTSD. This was survival against impossible odds. The notes crashed and rolled, built and released, demanded and questioned. The technique required was extraordinary, the physical stamina immense. But Isaiah had both. The middle section offered brief respite, gentler, questioning. But then the storm returned, bigger than before. Isaiah's whole body engaged, his face contorted with effort, with emotion, with the sheer force of what he was expressing. The final chords resonated through Carnegie Hall, powerful, definitive, complete. Isaiah paused, took a breath, wiped his face with his sleeve. The audience held its collective breath. This was it. The moment everyone had come for, his original composition. Requiem for the Forgotten, expanded from the version in the viral video, but maintaining its essence. Before beginning, Isaiah spoke. The first words he'd said since walking on stage. This piece is for everyone who's ever felt invisible, for everyone who's been forgotten, for the veterans sleeping under bridges, for the people society walks past without seeing, for the dreams that died and somehow came back to life. This is for you. This is us. Then he began to play. The opening was silence, just like in the original. 15 seconds of Isaiah sitting still, hands hovering, the audience wondering if something was wrong. Then the first note, low, sustained, lonely. The piece built from there, slowly, carefully, like someone learning to walk again, learning to trust again, learning to hope again. The gospel influences emerged, call and response, the church of his childhood, his mother's faith, the community that had held him when everything else fell apart. Then the blues, raw and honest, the pain without apology, the suffering without sugarcoating. This was the street music, the survival music, the music of people who keep going when there's no logical reason to keep going. Isaiah's playing became more intense. The classical training emerged. Complex harmonies, sophisticated structures, but filtered through everything that had come after. The technique was in service of the story. The perfection was in service of the truth. The piece moved through movements, dark to light, despair to hope, breaking to healing. But not in a neat line. Real life doesn't heal linearly. There were setbacks in the music, moments when the darkness returned, when the pain resurged. But each time the light came back stronger. The jazz section was improvisation, pure creation in the moment. Isaiah let go of the written music and just played. Let his hands go where they wanted. Let the moment dictate what came next. This was freedom. This was flying. And then everything came together. All the themes from earlier, gospel blues, classical jazz, weaving together, conversing with each other, creating something that was more than the sum of its parts, something that was uniquely American, uniquely Detroit, uniquely Isaiah. The climax built gradually, layer upon layer of sound, complexity upon complexity. Isaiah's hands were everywhere at once. The music was huge, overwhelming, a tsunami of sound and emotion. The audience was swept up in it. No one could remain untouched, unmoved, unchanged. And then at the peak, when it seemed like the music couldn't get any bigger, any more powerful, Isaiah brought it back down. Gentle again, simple again. The same opening theme from 23 minutes earlier, but transformed, changed by the journey, made beautiful by having survived. The final notes were peace, acceptance, not victory in the conventional sense, but something deeper. The peace of someone who's been to hell and made it back, who carries the scars but no longer lets them define everything. Isaiah played the last note. Let it resonate. Let it fade naturally into silence. And sat there, hands on the keys, head bowed, breathing heavily, completely spent. The silence that followed was holy, sacred. No one moved. No one breathed. The moment was too fragile, too precious. Everyone understanding they'd witnessed something that might never happen again in exactly this way. Then someone in the veterans section stood up, began to clap. Others joined, standing, applauding. Within seconds, the entire Carnegie Hall was on its feet. 2,500 people expressing what words couldn't, what only applause could attempt. Isaiah didn't move, couldn't move. He sat at the piano, overwhelmed as the ovation washed over him. The applause went on and on. 5 minutes, 7 minutes, 10 minutes. People crying, people cheering, people bearing witness to redemption made real. Finally, Isaiah stood, turned to the audience, and bowed. Not the formal bow of a concert pianist, but the deep, grateful bow of someone who'd been given a gift. The gift of being seen, of being heard, of mattering. He looked out at the faces, at Riley sobbing in the front row, at the veterans, many of them openly weeping, at the formerly homeless individuals in their section seeing themselves reflected in his story, at Dr. Kim beaming with professional pride and personal joy. This was it. This was the moment, not just of performance, but of transformation, of integration, of becoming. Isaiah Walker had played Carnegie Hall. The applause didn't stop. Even after Isaiah bowed, even after he tried to leave the stage, the audience wouldn't let him go. They kept clapping, kept standing, kept demanding his return. Isaiah came back out 3 times. Each time the ovation renewed. Carnegie Hall staff later said it was the longest standing ovation in the venue's recent history. 15 minutes of continuous applause. Finally, the audience began to quiet. Not to leave, but to listen. Because something was happening. Someone in the veteran section started singing, softly at first. Amazing Grace, the old hymn, the song of redemption. Others joined in. Veterans, homeless individuals, regular audience members. The song spread through Carnegie Hall, 2,000 people singing together, for Isaiah, for each other, for everyone who'd ever been lost and found. Isaiah stood on stage listening, tears streaming down his face. This wasn't in the program, wasn't planned, but it was perfect. The audience taking his gift of music and reflecting it back, creating community, creating meaning, creating hope. When the song ended, the audience finally began to file out, but many came to the stage first, reached up to touch Isaiah's hand, to thank him, to share their stories, to tell him what the performance meant. A veteran in his 70s, wearing his service medals, gripped Isaiah's hand and said, "You played what I've never been able to say. Thank you." A young woman, 19 or 20, said, "I was homeless for 2 years. I've been housed for 3 months. This performance reminded me that I'm not my circumstances. I'm more than what happened to me." A music teacher from Detroit brought 3 of Isaiah's students from the after-school program. They'd made the trip to New York, wanted to see their teacher do what he'd told them was possible. "You did it, Mr. Walker," one of them said. "You actually did it." Isaiah hugged each of them, no longer the distant guarded man from the street corner, but present, open, connected. Backstage, Riley found him, threw her arms around him. "You were incredible. Perfect. Amazing. I can't even..." "Thank you," Isaiah said simply. "For everything. For hearing the music in the abandoned building. For not letting me run. For believing this was possible when I couldn't. You did the work, Isaiah. You showed up. You played. You were brave enough to be seen." They were interrupted by a venue manager. "Mr. Walker, there are over 30 media outlets requesting interviews. Rolling Stone, the New York Times, NPR, all the major networks. How would you like to handle this?" Isaiah looked at Riley, then at the manager. "Not tonight. Tonight I just want to sit with what happened. The media can wait. But this is your moment." "This was my moment," Isaiah corrected gently. "On stage, with the music, that was my moment. The rest is just noise." The reviews were unanimous, glowing, extraordinary. Critics who'd seen thousands of performances called it one of the most powerful concerts of their careers. Not just because of the technical skill, which was evident, but because of the emotional honesty, the raw humanity. The New York Times headline, "At Carnegie Hall, a pianist plays his way home." The Washington Post. Isaiah Walker's performance redefines what classical music can be. Rolling Stone, from streets to stage, the most important piano concert of the decade. But Isaiah barely read them. The reviews didn't matter. The validation didn't matter. What mattered was that he'd done it. He'd stood on that stage. He'd played his truth. He'd survived the exposure and found it didn't destroy him. In fact, it had freed him. The record label offer came back this time with different terms. They wanted an album of original compositions, Isaiah's music, his voice, full creative control. He thought about it for a week and said yes, but on his terms. Recording in Detroit, using the new Community Music Center, proceeds split between veteran organizations and music education programs. The book deal was still there, too, but Isaiah wasn't ready for that. Maybe someday. When he had more distance, when he understood his own story better. For now, living it was enough. What Isaiah did do was commit fully to teaching. The Detroit Community Music Center became his home base. He taught 5 days a week, worked with kids who reminded him of himself, shared his story, showed them that talent was important, but persistence mattered more. that falling down wasn't failure, that the music could save your life if you let it. He also started a program specifically for veterans with PTSD. Music therapy combined with traditional treatment, using what had saved him to help others find their own way back. The program was small at first, 8 participants, but it grew. Word spread. Other cities wanted to replicate the model. Isaiah maintained his therapy with Dr. Kim. The PTSD didn't disappear after Carnegie Hall. He still had nightmares, still had panic attacks, still had days when getting out of bed felt impossible. But he'd learned to manage it, to work with it instead of against it, to accept that healing wasn't linear, that carrying trauma didn't mean being defined by it. He performed occasionally, select venues, always for causes he believed in, always with the stipulation that proceeds go to helping others. But he was careful about his public presence, protective of his private life, of his time, of his energy. 6 months after Carnegie Hall, Riley and Isaiah were walking through downtown Detroit, past the corner where he used to hold his cardboard sign. Isaiah stopped, looked at the spot. A different person was there now. A woman, middle-aged, holding a similar sign. Isaiah approached her. "What's your name?" he asked. "Diane," she said, wary. "I'm Isaiah. I used to stand right here. Same spot, same sign." Diane looked at him skeptically. "Sure you did." Isaiah pulled out his wallet, gave her 3 $20 bills. "For food, for whatever you need. And also there's a music program at the community center on 3rd Avenue. They serve dinner at 5. Good people. They'll help if you want help." Diane took the money, nodded, didn't say anything else. As Isaiah and Riley walked away, Riley said, "You think she'll go?" "I don't know. Maybe. Maybe not. But she knows someone saw her. Someone who understands. Sometimes that's enough to start." 1 year after the viral video, Isaiah returned to the abandoned conservatory building. Except it wasn't abandoned anymore. The Detroit Community Music Center was officially open, renovated, beautiful. The old auditorium restored to its former glory. And at the center of the stage, the piano. The same piano from the video, professionally restored, perfectly tuned, but still the same instrument that had saved Isaiah's life. The opening ceremony was huge. City officials, donors, community members, media, but also the kids from the neighborhood, the veterans from the program, the people experiencing homelessness who'd been given priority for participation in the center's programs. Isaiah was asked to play, to christen the space. He sat at the piano he knew so well, looked out at the auditorium that had once been empty and dark, now filled with people and light. A year ago, he began, "I came to this building looking for shelter from the rain. I found this piano. I thought I was just finding an instrument, but I was finding my life again. I was finding hope. I was finding purpose. This space is for everyone who feels lost, everyone who's been forgotten, everyone who's looking for shelter and might find something more. Music saved my life. This building saved my life, and now it can save others. To everyone who supported making this happen. To the city of Detroit. To Riley, who heard music in a broken place and decided to care. To every kid who walks through these doors carrying dreams they're afraid to believe in. To every veteran trying to find their way home. To every person who thinks they're invisible. You're not invisible. You matter. Your story matters. Your music matters. And this space is for you. Then he played. Not requiem for the forgotten. Not Beethoven or Chopin or Rachmaninoff, but something new, a piece he'd been composing. About Detroit, about resilience, about communities that fall and rise again, about people who survive, who persist, who create beauty from ruins. It was hopeful without being naive, joyful without forgetting pain, complex because life is complex, beautiful because beauty is possible even in the hardest places. When he finished, the applause was warm, genuine. But Isaiah didn't need the applause anymore. He had something more important: purpose, community, a reason to wake up every morning, students who looked up to him, people whose lives he touched. Music that mattered. Riley found him after the ceremony. They stood together on the stage, looking out at the renovated space. "You did it," she said. "You really did it." "We did it," Isaiah corrected. "I would have stayed invisible forever if you hadn't cared enough to listen. I just recorded a video. You did the rest." Isaiah shook his head. "You did more than that. You saw me when I was invisible. You believed in me when I didn't believe in myself. You gave me a chance. That's everything." They stood in comfortable silence for a moment. Then Riley said, "What's next for you?" Isaiah thought about it. Teaching, playing, living, being present, being grateful, being human. That's enough. That's more than enough. That's everything. So what can we learn from Isaiah Walker's story? What does it mean that a man can fall so far and still find his way back? Maybe it means that no one is truly lost. That even in the darkest places, even under bridges and in abandoned buildings, the spark of who we are doesn't completely die. It waits. It hopes. It persists. Maybe it means that talent alone isn't enough. That natural gifts can be buried by trauma, by circumstance, by the weight of life. But that the gifts don't disappear. They can be rediscovered, reclaimed, reborn into something even more meaningful than they were before. Maybe it means that we need people like Riley, people who don't look away, who hear music where others hear only noise, who believe in possibilities that the rest of us have given up on, who bear witness, who care. Maybe it means that second chances are real, that redemption isn't just a story we tell ourselves, that the arc of a life can bend from tragedy back toward hope. Not easily, not quickly, but possible. Isaiah Walker's journey from Juilliard to the streets to Carnegie Hall isn't typical. Most people experiencing homelessness don't have viral videos, don't have hidden talents waiting to be discovered, don't get Carnegie Hall debuts. And that's important to acknowledge. Isaiah's story doesn't solve homelessness, doesn't fix PTSD, doesn't erase the systemic failures that put him on the streets in the first place. But it does remind us of something crucial. Behind every person we pass without seeing is a story, a history, a humanity that deserves recognition. Isaiah was always worthy of dignity and care, not because he could play piano, but because he was human. The music didn't make him valuable. It just made him visible. And visibility matters. Being seen matters. Being heard matters. Not just for the Isaiah Walkers of the world, but for every person who's been forgotten. Every veteran struggling with invisible wounds. Every person experiencing homelessness who once had dreams. Every kid in a failing school district who has gifts the world will never discover unless someone pays attention. The abandoned piano in the abandoned building wasn't magic. It was just an instrument, broken out of tune, forgotten. But in Isaiah's hands, it became something more. A lifeline, a voice, a bridge between who he'd been and who he could become. We all have that potential, to take what's broken and make it sing, to find beauty in ruins, to create meaning from pain, to refuse to let circumstances have the final word about who we are. Isaiah Walker teaches us that the music doesn't end when we fall. It just waits. Patient, persistent, believing in our return even when we've stopped believing in ourselves. And when we finally come back to it, when we finally have the courage to put our hands on the keys again, the music forgives. It welcomes. It says you're home. That's the real message of Isaiah's story. Not that one man succeeded against impossible odds, but that comeback is possible. That visibility can be reclaimed, that the forgotten can be remembered, that the lost can be found, that somewhere in the ruins of what was new life can begin. Isaiah Walker played Carnegie Hall, but more importantly, Isaiah Walker survived, persisted, hoped, created, connected, lived. And that's the music that matters most. If this story moved you, consider supporting organizations that serve veterans with PTSD, that provide music education to underserved communities, that work to end homelessness, that see people instead of problems. Because behind every invisible person is an untold story. Behind every forgotten life is a human being who deserves to be seen. Be someone who listens. Be someone who cares. Be someone who hears the music even in the broken places. Be someone like Riley. Or be someone like Isaiah, who refused to let the fall be the end, who found one broken piano and used it to rebuild a life. The music is waiting for all of us. In the most unexpected places, in the darkest moments, in the spaces we've abandoned, all we have to do is be brave enough to play.